everyone. Welcome to Short Story Month. My name is Deepa Rajagopalan, and I'm the author of the short story collection Peacocks of Instagram, published by House of Anansi. Today, I'm very thrilled to be joined by two authors of recent short story collections, Clea Young and Chido Muchemwa, for a discussion about the art of short story writing. Their collections are both published under Anansi's short story imprint Astoria. I will just get started with introducing them, and then I'm really excited for this conversation. Chido Muchemwa is a Zimbabwean writer living in Toronto. Her work has appeared in Augur, Catapult, Baltimore Review, Prism International, among others. She's been shortlisted twice for the Short Story Day Africa Prize, and she was the winner of the 2022 Bridge Prize. Chido's debut short story collection, Who Will Bury You, came out in October and follows the lives of Zimbabweans who often feel like they are on the outside looking in. Clea Young, she's also joining us today. Her stories have been included in numerous literary journals, 3 volumes of the Journey Prize Stories and Best Canadian Stories 2025. She's twice been longlisted for the CBC Short Story Prize. Her debut collection, Teardown, was published by Freehand Books. Young grew up in Victoria, BC, and completed an MFA at the University of British Columbia. She lives in Squamish, British Columbia. Clea Young's sophomore collection, Welcome to the Neighborhood, came out early this month. The stories in this collection explore failed friendships, nosy neighbors, and women who dance with disaster. That sounds so interesting. I just want to get started. I like short stories are my favorite form to write and to read, but it just comes to me really naturally. So I thought it'd be a good idea for the 3 of us to kind of talk about what attracts you to the short story form. Maybe Clea, we can start with you.
Sure, yeah. I started out writing poetry largely, and I took a first year sort of survey fiction class at the University of creative writing class at the University of Victoria, and a portion of that was fiction. And I remember our instructor bringing in the Vancouver author Juji Gardner to talk to our class about fiction, and her collection, All the Anxious Girls on Earth, had just come out. And I was just so impacted by that author visit and by the story she read to our class, which was in the second person. And I'd never heard anything like it. And it just sort of floored me what you could do with a bit more space than poetry. And I found myself so enamored by that second person point of view, which I don't think I've ever written in, but despite that. But that was sort of my entry point to falling in love with the short story form. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Clea. Chido?
So I've always wanted to write a novel. So in my mind, when I started writing short stories, I thought it was just going to be practice, to be like, I'm going to figure out how to write before I actually attempt the novel. But once I actually started to figure out how the mechanics of a short story worked, there's just something about the potency of the form, because it's so short as opposed to a novel. You can really look at an idea and dig deep and just come up with something that emotionally resonates. And that's kind of what keeps me coming back to short stories.
Yeah, I think it's the same kind of experience for me. I was working on a novel, and then during the MFA, I read some incredible short story collections, and then I started writing them. Similarly, I was like, yeah, this is practice during the MFA. But then I got so into it, and I wrote one story, the title story of the collection, and then I'm like, I have to write a collection. And that's kind of how I got started. I just think it's so wonderful, when you're able to kind of suffuse so much in just a few pages, right? Like, it's just like you just get to come in and out and then make the reader feel, something incredible, right? I think it's a privilege to have that opportunity to move the reader in such a short amount of time, right? And I also think it's a challenge, right? Because you have so little space for like meandering, like every sentence must land. So I think, Clea, what you said about poetry, that really resonated with me. It's like you take poetry a little bit further, but you really need to make sure that every sentence must land. Yeah, and I felt like when I was writing the collection, I felt like for all the stories, the characters, I needed to know everything about their character, about all the characters, even though it wasn't in the page, right? Like I kind of knew who these people were, what they liked, how their parents were, where they grew up, but like a lot of it wasn't in the collection. But because I knew it, it was like I was able to give that lived-in quality to those stories because like you come with that knowledge. So I just think it's so wonderful, and it's just a form that comes naturally to me too. Do you both remember like what was the first short story you ever read? And like or like the first short story that really moved you? For me, it was like in school, The Last Leaf by O. Henry. Like that just was like that was my first memory of like reading something short and being like, wow, that just blew me away. Do you remember like what might be the first one that really moved you?
For me, I think it was probably Shirley Jackson's The Lottery in high school. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I was
You
going to
know?
say the exact same story
Oh,
because
really?
it was like I went to a convent, like it was a Catholic boy high school,
Yeah.
and when that story circulated, it was kind of like illicit, like people were like passing it down passages. It was just the first time I'd seen a story move me personally, but also like create a reaction across the
Mm.
school of like, what is this incredible thing?
Oh, that's so wonderful. That's great. I have one other question, and this is something that I get asked a lot, but also something that I think about a lot. It's basically like, how do you choose the point of view and perspective for a short story? Does it come naturally to you? Is it like trial and error? You start with, one point of view and then you kind of see if it works. Like, what's your process like? Maybe we can start with you, Chido.
Point of view for me is like the fun part of a story because I do a lot of experimentation with point of view.
Mhm.
Like the first three drafts of a story tend to be different points of view because it takes me a while to figure out who wants to tell the story and whether I need to be like close to them or I need it to be in their voice or I need it to be outside in third person. An example of kind of how I mess around with point of view is the two stories that start in the collection, Who Will Bury You and This Will Break My Mother's Heart. I was writing a story about this girl and she was worried about her mother finding out she was gay, right? And the mother was coming across as stereotypical. So I decided to write the story from her point of view just to see what it would feel like. And it ended up becoming Who Will Bury You. So kind of how point of view
Oh,
gives you access to a different kind of story. So
oh,
that's
absolutely.
always what I mess around, why I mess around with point of view.
Isn't it so fun? Like when you do that and it's like it opens up a part of your brain that, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, I didn't think this way. And it just gives you even access to a different language, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about the same thing, but from a completely different perspective. Clea, you?
Yeah, I love that. That resonates with me, Cheeto. I think when I come at a story, I usually kind of an opening line comes to me and it's usually in a point of view already.
Mm,
And then so I just kind of chase that down however it's arrived, but then definitely I go back and question it to see if it was ultimately the right choice. And I did have an instructor say to me once, and it always sits in my head. Lorna Jackson, she's a writer and a fiction professor or was at the University of Victoria. But she always said, if you're going to write in first person, you have to have a very good reason as to why you're doing that. So whenever I
mm,
leap in first person, I think, okay, why am I in this very
mm.
close place, and why is this uh, person's voice important? I guess, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's yeah, like you said, like sometimes when I write the story, like the point of view comes with it, right? But I do try to question it. Like I try to see, what point of view and perspective will kind of give me access to the most plain telling, right? Like with the least melodrama, and like sometimes it's like very surprisingly different point of view, right? Like I was writing this story in the collection. There's a story called Whatever Happened Happened for the Good. It's a story about this woman who lives with her family in Canada, but she needs a kidney transplant, to survive. And then she and her family travel to India to find a kidney donor. So at first I wrote it from her point of view, from the mother's point of view, and it was just so claustrophobic. It was just, I felt like it was hard for me not to be melodramatic, when I'm just so close to what was happening. So then I did end up switching it and writing it from her child's point of view, which was just a completely different story now, right? Because it's like, what does the child notice? Completely different things, right? And it helped add some distance. I think like you can create distance either through time or through perspective, right? Like what point of view you're telling the story. And the time, like it needed to be told when it's actually happening. So I didn't play with that, but I just switching into the child's point of view. It's like it almost became about what she saw, and it gave it a slightly more objective point of view, right? And I thought that the story just worked. So I love to do that trial and error thing. It takes awfully long to finish a story when you do that.
Yes.
But it's just so fun. I just love doing that. But it's not fun in a novel though.
No.
No.
I'm working on a novel now, and I'm like, you can't play like this. Like you have to decide early on. Yeah, so I think I really kind of enjoyed having this conversation with us about point of view. So maybe now I can ask Clea. Oh, sorry. Were you saying
No,
something?
thank you. Thanks. Those were great questions.
Maybe Clea, I can ask you a question, and then you can ask Chido a question.
Sure, yeah.
So in your collection, the story, The Day the Children Left, right? It leans into speculative fiction. It's an interesting departure from the tone and style of the other stories in the collection. Welcome to the Neighborhood. What made you decide to explore the theme of climate change through speculative fiction? Like, I'm very interested to know this because I also have a climate change story, which kind of came out of nowhere in the collection. So I'm really interested to know your take on this.
Yeah, this came out of in 2017. I think it was 2017 or 2018. I honestly can't recall because both were terribly bad wildfire seasons in BC, and both, I believe, there was a state of emergency declared. And I think those years were kind of the first time in my adult life when that had happened, and it was grim. It was, the sun was just this orange ball in the sky of gray, and it was really apocalyptic looking in Vancouver, and there was ash sort of falling from the sky. And at the same time, it was summer, and I was sending my son to kind of to camps that summer as I was working. You know how you got to find stuff for them to do. So he was going to a camp on Grouse Mountain in North Vancouver. So every day would send him up the gondola onto this mountain into a cloud. I'd send him up into this cloud of ash, essentially. And up there, he was doing things like learning to build shelters and archery and whatnot. So it was the combination of having a child in this environment, learning survival skills, and being in this very dire situation that I hadn't really encountered before, and I didn't know how to write about that. I didn't have a way into that from my usual approach to short stories, and it sort of just arrived to me. What if the children decided to leave this place, and because we weren't taking the care of them that we should have been, and it sort of just went from there. It was, yeah, just a creative exercise really that turned into a story. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to, especially when it's your children and when it's happening now, like it's really hard to kind of come to terms with that. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Maybe Clea, do you want to ask a question to Chido?
Yeah, I'd love to. Chido, many of your protagonists experience forms of loss, of culture, identity, and relationships. What draws you to writing about loss?
So it was not deliberate. I remember when the reviews started to come from the collection and everyone kept saying, oh, this is a collection about grieving. This is a collection about loss. And I was like, I don't remember it being this sad when I was writing it. But I think what I was tapping into is loss is kind of just an inherent part of being an immigrant, because being in one place always means that you're missing out on stuff in the other place. So that's kind of where it started to stem from. But really, the pandemic changed a lot of the way I viewed a lot of things about loss and grief and relationships and what it means to leave home and kind of the things that you leave behind, because things were happening in the pandemic, right? A lot of upheaval was happening to my family back home, but I had no access to them because the borders were closed. And it just, that kind of bled through all of the stories to think about what do you really lose when you leave home? Okay, so Deepa, one of the things that really resonated for me with your story is that with your story collection is that there is a lot of humor sprinkled through the stories, which is something that I personally am not very good at doing. So I just kind of wanted to ask, how important is laughter in your work and how do you incorporate it?
Yeah, thanks, Chido. I love this question because when I was writing this collection, like humor is really important for me. And a lot of my humor is very specific to a culture. So I was hoping people would get it. So I was really happy that people, a lot of the readers got the humor. But I love writing humor because most South Asian people I know, and most of my characters in the collection are South Asian, and most people I know in real life are funny, right? But I don't always see that represented in literature about them, right? Because it's usually the stories of trauma, but it's kind of restricted to the trauma, right? And I feel that has not been my experience. I wanted my collection to represent the people that I'm writing about, right? So I guess, it's sort of a collection about people who don't really have the luxury to always even be morally superior, right? So they do kind of get by through kind of different kinds of, in many cases, like trickery, but there is a lot of underlying humor on top of like these characters being like these flawed characters, right? So I think humor is such an incredible way to be able to talk about some very difficult things, because some of the stories I wouldn't have been able to get into them, get into some of the topics if I didn't have that access to the humor, because then it's just really hard to even write, right? And I also think in many sort of racialized cultures, South Asian culture for sure, many indigenous cultures, like you don't really separate the humor from the tragedy, right? Like it's sort of an act of rebellion to be funny. And many people I know in real life, the harder their life gets, almost like the funnier they get. And I wanted that to be represented in that stories, right? In my stories. And I think it's a form of creativity to be able to live your life like that with humor, and like go through some of these traumatic experiences through humor. And I think it's really a challenge for me to see, okay, how can I take a sentence, like go down to that sentence level? How can this sentence be both heartbreaking and like humorous at the same time, right? Like, a lot of times I would write a draft of the story and I'm like, oh my God, this is such a drag. It's like just weighing me down. And then, I'm like, how can I just add the right humor at the right places, so that it feels, there's a different take to it. So you're able to kind of sit and absorb it because there's this humor underlying. Yeah.
That's awesome. I just had a thought in light of talking about humor. I've read a short story collection recently by Vancouver author Caroline Adderson called A Way to Be Happy, and she's very funny, and I found myself laughing out loud reading some of those stories. So I was just wondering, and I thought it was a great collection. I wonder if either of you want to share about a collection you're either excited about reading or have read recently, or just generally that you love and would like to recommend.
I love this question. I actually do have a recommendation. It's actually my book's twin. The book came out the same day as Who Will Bury You. It's called Obligations to the Wounded by Zambian writer called Mobanga Kalima Mukwento. And it's just a brilliant, brilliant short story collection. As a writer, I always love collections where after you read it, you're like, oh, you can do that? And then you go and you write and try and figure out something new. So yeah, she's just excellent blending of Zambian traditional storytelling and just brilliant work. So yeah, highly
Can
recommend.
you repeat the title?
Obligations to the Wounded.
Okay, I will check it out. What about you, Deepa?
I'm trying to remember if I can find a recent one.
Doesn't have to be recent, just one that you've loved and had an impact on you. I'm putting you on.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, no, I think some of the collections that you don't think is funny, and when they end up being funny, that's what really kind of affects me a lot, right? Like Suvankam Tamawansa's collection, How to Pronounce Night, but also some of her stories that came more recently in the New Yorker. You just don't expect them to be funny, but there will be kind of almost a like an offhand remark or just a throwaway line at the end of a paragraph. And I'm like, oh my God, that just killed me. I think that really impacts me than somebody trying to be funny, right from the whole scene is funny, right? Which is also a different kind of humor, which I enjoy too. But I really like it when it's like a serious story and then you're going through it and there'll be one sentence. I'm like, that is hilarious. I did not expect that there, right? Which I think is really hard to do.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Yeah, so I think this has been really fun. I mean, I wish we could keep talking about short stories forever, and I wish people would just stop asking us for the novel and just keep publishing our short stories. Thank you so much. This was really fun. Once again, I'm Deepa Rajagopalan, and I was joined by Chido Muchemwa, author of Who Will Bury You, and Clea Young, author of Welcome to the Neighborhood. All our books are published by House of Anansi under the Astoria print. You can find our short story collections and where to order them at houseofanansi.com. So thank you so much.